Today's Daf Yomi on the third day of Hanukkah is Nedarim Daf Nun Zayin Nedarim 57. So we're going to start with the Mishnah on the top of Nun Zayin Amid Aleph. If a person says Konim Piros Ha'elu Olai, if a person says these fruits are prohibited upon me, or Konim Hein Api, they're prohibited into my mouth, or Konim Hein Api, and all these expressions. He's saying these fruits are prohibited. Also, is going to be prohibited b'chilufeihen, with anything that's exchanged with them. If he sells it for money, for example, the fruits remain prohibited, and also the money that you exchange them with also remains prohibited. U'begiduleihen, and anything that grows from them. Whereas if he says shani ochel, that fruits that I eat, or shani toim, that I taste, then we're going to say mutar b'chilufeihen u'begiduleihen. Then we're going to say he's allowed to eat the food that's exchanged with them or grows from them. What's the difference between the two cases? So there are different approaches amongst the Rishonim. We'll follow the Ran's approach. The Ran's approach is, we'll read from the Ran. The Ran explains, the kivan sheparat advarim hanesarim olav. Since he specified those things that are prohibited upon him, he doesn't say fruits in general, but he says these fruits, and he looks at them and says, these are the fruits that are prohibited. Shavinu alei kehektish. It's in his mind, he has compared it to hektish, and it's like it's something that's dedicated to the temple. Just like if you have a cow to the temple and then you exchange that cow, the cow is hektish, and then you sell the cow remains holy, and now the money is also holy. So too by these fruits. And the Ran explains, the lo dami mishum hachi mitzvah b'chilufeihen ki u'begiduleihen. This reason he's prohibited in anything that's exchanged for them or grows for them. Just like anything you exchange with hektish and grows from hektish is prohibited. And now the Ran explains, it's not at all similar to someone who makes just a general vow from figs or grapes, because since he didn't specify which grapes, but rather he just says, I'm prohibited from grapes, then it's clearly he didn't make him in his mind like hektish. There, his intent was only to prohibit that type of fruit. Therefore, the only time he's going to be prohibited is when he does poret, is when he specifies it. Like here, I'm a peros elu. So too, the Ran explains, if he would say peros makamploni, if the fruits of, let's say, Washington, D.C., or the fruits of this specific person, since he specifies it, given sheyichad areyu kaporet, it's like he specifies it, and therefore it's prohibited in their chilufeihen u'geduleihen. That's the beginning of the Ran. So the Ran's basic point is that the distinction is, if you specify a specific group of fruits, then those fruits are going to be prohibited. But if you just say the grapes in general or figs in general, then it's not going to be prohibited in their chilufeihen or geduleihen. But now back to the Mishnah, even when we say that if you say, let's say, grapes or figs in general, and it's not prohibited in their chilufeihen or geduleihen, that is only b'davar shezaro kawa. That's only by something where the seed disintegrates. Where the seed disintegrates, then we're going to say it's a new item. And b'davar she'ein zaro kawa, but if it's something where the seed does not disintegrate, I feel geduleihen asur, and then it will remain prohibited forever. So we might think, okay, if the seed disintegrates, it's a new item, it's completely separate, and therefore the chilufin and the geduleihen are permitted. But the Baalei Musar say, actually, in order for us to have growth and to really do tshuva and to really repent, to become a new person, we sometimes have to have a disintegration of our own seed. We have to tear down certain things, and only then can it grow and only then can we grow and be stronger and stronger. But if it's just a continuation, then it's still the same item. And if we don't break it down at all, then we're never going to grow. Says the next case of our Mishnah, Omer Le'ishto, a person says to his wife, Kone Masi Yadecha Alai, a person says to his wife, I'm going to prohibit the work of your hands upon me. Kone Mein Al Pi, they're prohibited to me. Kone Mein Al Pi, they're prohibited to my mouth. Asar B'chilu Fayan. There is, so too, it's the same language of hektish, so it's prohibited with anything that's exchanged from them, will be gidulein. Anything that grows in them. The word konem is an expression of hektish. But if he says shani yochal, shani toem, but if he says anything I eat or taste, muter b'chilufein or b'gidulein, then he's going to be allowed to have their exchange. And that's also by davar shazar kal, that's by something where the seed disintegrates. Or something the seed does not disintegrate, then I feel gedua asurin, then even the growth of the growth is going to be prohibited. Let's say the third case of the Mishnah, so let's say sha'at oseh, anything that you do, any ochel, I'm not going to eat ara pesach. He says that anything that you make, I'm not going to eat until Pesach. Sha'at oseh any mitkasal ara Pesach. He says, let's say anything, any clothing you make, I'm not going to wear until Pesach. So then, Pesach. So then, since he says I'm only prohibiting this vow for a specific period of time until Pesach, let's say she made it before Pesach, then mutar la'achov was kasos achar Pesach. Then he's going to be allowed to eat from the food and wear the clothing after Pesach. Well, let's say his language is different. Let's say he says sha'at oseh ara Pesach. Let's say he says anything that you make until Pesach, any ochel. Let's say he says anything that you make until Pesach, I'll never eat. Or sha'at oseh ara Pesach, or anything you make until Pesach, any miskasa, I'll never wear. Then also if they have Pesach, then if she makes it before Pesach, also was kasos achar Pesach. Then it's going to be prohibited to eat it even after Pesach. So we say that there will remain prohibited forever. And now we refer to a Mishnah. Now the Mishnah refers to a case which we cited earlier in our Gemara back on Tesvav. If he says, and this was the couple who was in this unfortunate relationship where he didn't want her to go to her father's home. If he says, Sha'at ne'anisli ara Pesach, he says, you're not allowed to benefit from me until Pesach, im hoechas at l'beis avich, he says, ara chag. So he says, you're not allowed to have any benefit from me until Pesach if you're going to go to your father's home anytime between now and Sukkot. So he's standing in the month of Adar. And he says in the month of Adar, you're not going to be allowed to have any benefit from me from now until Pesach if from now until Sukkot you go to your father's home, which is obviously after Pesach. So then what's that? Pesach. So let's say she goes before Pesach. Well, of course, Asur Ba'anaso out of Pesach. So if she goes before Pesach, then obviously she's going to be prohibited to have benefit from him until Pesach, because she clearly is in violation of this principle. So let's say she had, so remember, just review what we had said earlier in the Gemara back on Tesvav. The Gemara in Daf Tesvav had said that if she had no intent to go to her father's home until Sukkot, so is she allowed to go to her father's home before Pesach? So is she allowed to benefit? So if she has no intent to go to her father's home before Sukkot, then according to Rav Nachman, she's allowed to benefit from him before Pesach. And we're not concerned that maybe she's going to violate this condition and go to his home before Sukkot. He has no intent to do it. And then we're not concerned that retroactively she's going to be in violation of Bal Yachel, in violation of the Neder. Whereas according to Rabbi Yehuda, rabbinically we're going to say, since we're concerned that maybe she would go to her father's home before Sukkot, rabbinically we're going to say that she also can't get enough from him before Pesach, because maybe retroactively she's going to be in violation. And according to, so let's say she did go to, let's say she did go to her father's home before Sukkot, even though she had gotten benefits, so she wasn't allowed to have gotten the benefit, and retroactively this is made clear. So then it's Machokas Rishonim. According to the Ran, if she went and benefited, but she went to her father's home and she had benefited from her husband, she's going to be liable for lashes. And even though she's not the one who made the neder, still we're going to say that since she did the action, she's in violation of the lashes. So the husband doesn't get lashes in that case, but she does. That's what the Ran says. Whereas the Rambam disagrees, and the Rambam says just the opposite. If he gives her something that gives her benefit after she had and then she goes to her father's home, so since he is the one who participated in giving her benefit, and he's the one who made the vow, he's the one who's going to get the lashes. But she doesn't get the lashes because she didn't make the vow. So it's a dispute between the Rambam and the Ran. Who gets the lashes here? So back to the text of the Gemara. So back to the text of the Mishnah. We had said, let's say, Achar, the top line on 57b, Achar Pesach, the Baal Yachel. So going back to the last statement on the bottom, then Zayin Amad Aleph, if he says, Sha'atna netli ada Pesach, you're not allowed to get any benefit from me until Pesach. If you're going to go in Molechet Atva Beit Avich, if you go to your father's home until Sukkot ada Chag, Ochel Fnei Pesach, if she goes before Pesach, Asura B'Hana'aso ada Pesach, then she's going to be prohibited. Then under those circumstances where he warns her that if you go to your father's home before Sukkot, then you're not going to be allowed to have any benefit until Pesach. She's prohibited to have benefit from on Pesach, and then if she'll go to her father's home Achar Pesach, then there's going to be a violation of Baal Yachel. According to the Ran, she's in violation. According to the Rambam, he's in violation. And the next line on top of 57b is, you're going to be prohibited from me all the way until Sukkot. If you go to your father's home, Pesach. So he says, not that you're prohibited to me, it's the opposite. He says, not that the previous case, he says you're prohibited to have any benefit from me until Pesach if you go to your father's home before Sukkot. Here he says you're prohibited, but in this case, he says you're prohibited to have any benefit from me until Sukkot if you go to your father's home before Pesach. If she goes before Pesach, she's indeed allowed, she's prohibited to go to her father's home before Sukkot, but after Pesach, she'd be allowed to go. And this case is seemingly obvious. So what's the whole point of it? That we don't say that we should make a decree that she can't go to her father's home after Pesach, so that she shouldn't forget as a gezerah. So Tosfos writes, really this last case is not a chiddush, but they just bring it down because they mentioned the earlier case. So now we go on with the Gemara. The Gemara says as follows. Ha'omer la'ishto, if a person says to his wife, Konei ma'aseh decha alai, Konei malpi, Konei malpi. This is the opening. This is the second case of our Mishnah where he says to his wife that basically your work is like hektish to me. So the Gemara is going to bring in a case which initially is not going to be connected to our Mishnah, but in two dapim we're going to see the Gemara is going to try and bring a proof for this case from our Mishnah. So for now, we have to not directly see the connection. So the case is Yishmael ish kfar yama, Amila ish kfar dima. So there is this man. He was Yishmael from Kfar Yama, and some say it's from Kfar Dima. Kfar Dima means it was the name of his city. The following question was raised in his hands. Hel Abiyadu is an expression means he went up. Some people say actually the question is going to be about an onion. Excuse me. So some people say he actually lifted up an onion at this point. That's what some Rishonim say. It says batza. Let's say you have an onion. An onion, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the onion is the example of something whose seed does not disintegrate. So therefore, the giduin should still, the growth should be prohibited. So the onion just keeps getting more and more bold, so it doesn't disintegrate the seed. So he picked up an onion and says, let's say you have an onion, batzal shah, akro b'shvuos, that you uprooted in the sabbatical year. So this onion has the kedusha of the shvius. It has the sanctity of the sabbatical year, which follows after when it was harvested. And the sanctity of the sabbatical year. What are some of the halachos? You're not allowed to sell it. That you have to destroy it once the crops, similar crops to it, are in the field, are no longer there. So this is an, and you're not allowed to plant it. So this is an onion that he harvested in the sabbatical year. But now he took this sabbatical year fruit and he planted it in the 8th year. He's not allowed to do that. But now, so it's sabbatical fruit. But now what happened was Rabu Gidua Valikaro. Now there was more growth over the main aspect of it. So the later growths were permitted, you might ask. So technically speaking, there would be a sufficient amount that it could have nullified it if we would apply the principles of nullification. And so now we want to know if this onion still is going to be considered like the sanctity of the sabbatical year. This is our question. Do we say Gidua Veter Vikaro Asur? Do we say that the growth that grows in the 8th year is going to be permitted, whereas the main onion remains prohibited? Or do we say Kivin the Rabu Gidua Meikaro Osin Gidua Heter Malanes Isarolo? So he takes for granted that the growth of the 8th year is permitted. So he says the question, I only have the following question. Is the onion from the 7th year also permitted? Do we say that since there's more growth from the 8th year over the initial bulb, so therefore it nullifies the initial bulb of the sabbatical year onion, and therefore that becomes permitted? Or do we say the bulb remains prohibited? So that's the question. So Asla Kame the Rabbi Ami. So he brought this question to Rabbi Ami. Yishmael Ish Kfar Yama. Some say Ish Kfar Dim. He brought this question to Rabbi Ami. And when he brought it to Rabbi Ami said, he said, I don't know the answer yet. I don't know the answer. You'll see. Don't give up on Rabbi Ami. Even though he says, I don't know the answer, he's going to come back later. So it's not the end of his speaking here. Also coming to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. So they came before Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha said, Pashlei min hada, Amar Rabbi Chanina Tritai. He says, let's answer this from what Rabbi Chanina Trita said in the name of Rabbi Yanai. What did he say? He said, Batzal shal truma. Let's say you have an onion that's truma onion. Let's say you have a truma onion. So meaning to say you have an onion that you had separated to give to the Kohen. It's truma. Cannot be eaten by a non-Kohen, cannot be eaten in a state of ritual impurity. Shenatu, and then you planted this onion, v'rabu gidua valikaro, and the later onion growth was greater than the initial growth. Mutter, we're going to say it's permitted. And so here too, what are we saying is permitted? The initial onion, because it was nullified. The initial bulb became nullified. And so therefore, we're going to say, since the name of Truma has itself disappeared. And so that's the answer to your question, to the question of Yishmael Ish Kfar Dim or Kfar Yama, that the 8th year sabbatical fruit should nullify not only is the growth of the 8th year permitted, but even the onion of the 7th year is permitted. So that's the answer. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? You followed this one approach of Rabbi Yanai, but I have two Amorai. Amoraim who argue against him. You say Rabbi Yanai, but I'm going to say two for you. So the Gemara says, Matnenu train. Who are these two who argue with Rabbi Yanai? These two who argue with Rabbi Yanai are the following. Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. The first case is the following. So we know that there's something called Arwa. Arwa is the tree, the first 3 years it's planted, you know how to eat from its fruit, you know how to benefit from its fruit. That's called Arwa. Well, let's say there's a tree after the first 3 years. That's called the Zakena. That's called a mature tree. So let's say you have a Yalda. Let's say you have a young tree that's under 3 years. Shesivcha Biskena, that you grafted it onto a mature tree. So now the fruit that's going to bring forth is going to have the law of the Arwa. because it's from the young tree, but there's also fruit from the older tree. Uba peros, and now we have fruit that's produced from this tree. Avbi shows sifa masayim. Even though the fruits of the new tree are 200 times the older tree, also we're going to say that even though. So we're going to say that even though the new fruits are so much greater than the initial tree by a size of 200 times, which is typically the amount where you nullify Arla, we're still going to say you're not allowed to benefit from those fruits, because we're going to say that the growth was growing after the main part, and that was prohibited. And so therefore, you're still not going to benefit from here. So we see from here that Rabbi Yochanan argues with Rabbi Yana, and he says that Kidui Heter, that something that grows that was, so to speak, permitted, is not going to nullify the prohibition. In this case of the Arla, the new fruit, which was obviously remains prohibited, even though part of it came from the initial plant, the initial tree, which would have been permitted, that part is going to be, even though it nullifies the initial tree, meaning to say, even though the initial tree is 200 times the new tree, nevertheless, we're going to say it's prohibited. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, and now we have another case. What's the other case? The case is a batzel shenatu b'kerem. Let's say you have onion that you planted in a vineyard, so that's a problem. That's called kulei akerem. There are 5 types of kulayim. One of them is called kulei akerem. And when you plant a vineyard, you're not allowed to plant any other type of growth there. So let's say you have an onion that's planted with a vineyard, and then you get rid of the grapevines. So once you get rid of the kulayim, then you're no longer in the prohibition, but the initial part was prohibited. So now we're going to say usher, that the whole onion is going to remain prohibited to have benefited, even though after you uprooted the vineyard, there was more growth. There was 200 times the initial part. Nevertheless, we're still going to say the initial part is going to remain prohibited, because we're saying that the growth that comes out are going to be like the initial part. And so we see from here that Rabbi Yochanan also argues with Rabbi Yanai, meaning to say that both the case of Rabbi Yochanan, both teachings of Rabbi Yochanan, both with respect to the Arla tree, which was grafted with the non-Arla tree, and the case of the onion that had initially started growing with kulaya kerem, we're still going to say that the fruit that grows afterwards is prohibited, because the initial fruit is not nullified by the new fruit that was permitted. So Hadar Asal Kamed Rabbi Ami. So now Yishmolish Kfar Yama brought us back to Rabbi Ami, who initially said, I didn't know. And he cited these teachings that were said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So these final 2 teachings, and he cited another one. What was this other teaching? He says, Litra Pitsalam. Let's say you have a measure of onions, shetikna, that you took off the truma from the onions, and so now it's no longer tevel, and so now it's mutukan zara, and then you planted this onion in the field, mitasera tofikua, that you need to take meiser from the entire onion, not only just from the part that grows, but also from the initial part. Alma, we see from here, osan giduin mivatlan ikar. We see from here that the growth nullifies the main part. Meaning to say, in the case of truma, so what's this case here, where you have an onion, you took meiser from it, but then you took truma from it, but then you replanted it, and after you replanted it, it makes you take truma from everything, not just from the additional growth. So we see from here that whatever grows nullifies the initial one, and so therefore maybe we could say from here that the later growth does nullify the initial growth. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a good example, because maybe that case we're just being strict there. We're saying just give truma out of a stringency. So therefore, that's not a good way to provide a solution. So the Gemara is going to still leave this question in search of a definitive answer. So we're going to take this up tomorrow. We'll stop the daf here.